Shortly after taking off from Jakarta last October, a Lion Air Boeing 737 MAX started to behave erratically. Pilots flipped through their manual, trying to figure out how to regain control of the aircraft. But the manual would be of little help. The brand new airplane crashed in the Java Sea, killing all 189 passengers and crew. Investigators suspect a new automated system on board called MCAS may have contributed to the tragedy. The system is designed to force the plane to pitch down if it thinks the aircraft is about to stall. But in the Lion Air case, a faulty sensor gave the wrong signal, prompting the MCAS system to kick in repeatedly, countering the pilot's efforts to bring the nose back up. CBC News has obtained a copy of the flight crew manual of the 737 MAX, and what's shocking many in the industry is what's not in it. There's not a single mention of it in the body of the manual, leaving some pilots fuming. I'm left to wonder, what else don't I know? The flight manual is inadequate and almost criminally insufficient, wrote a pilot in a report filed to a U.S. government safety database.
It should have been in there because the system is critical to the safety of the flight.
Retired pilot Raymond Hall flew for Air Canada for 36 years and is now practicing aviation law in Vancouver.
The pilots ought to have known that it was there, ought to have been able to recognize when it's implemented, and ought to have been able to respond effectively.
We did find exactly one mention of MCAS in the manual, in the glossary of abbreviations. Why would an acronym be in the glossary without appearing anywhere else? We asked Boeing, but got no answer.
Well, I think the fairly obvious conclusion is that a broader explanation of MCAS was included in an earlier edition of the manual, and somewhere along the way it ended up on the cutting room floor.
Aviation consultant Judson Rowlands has worked for several airlines and for a plane manufacturer. He says Boeing, facing stiff competition from Airbus, may have been looking to reduce training costs for airlines switching from its old 737 model.
I think the most likely reason for the MCAS not being mentioned in the manual is to remove it or prevent it from having to be included in 737 MAX transition training, which in turn will save 737 MAX operators training costs, because that's a significant enough system that you might need to have to upgrade from iPad-based training to either classroom-based or even simulator-based training.
In an emailed response to CBC News, Boeing didn't deny that there were no references to MCAS in the body of the manual. But a spokesman said that the relevant functions of the system were described in the manual, and that media reports that we intentionally withheld information about airplane functionality from our customers are simply untrue. Yet, days after the Lion Air crash, Boeing issued a safety bulletin providing for the first time to pilots details on how the anti-stall system worked and how to shut it down if it malfunctioned.
Should have been put there, in my view, as a pilot, and it should have been alerted. The pilot should have been trained, advised of it, and trained in the use of it.
The U.S. aviation regulator, the FAA, could have asked Boeing to disclose the existence of MCAS to pilots earlier, but the FAA had delegated much of its regulating authority to Boeing employees, and the MAX was certified.
I think what we've run up against here is something of an unprecedented scenario where a manufacturer appears to have taken some shortcuts in its certification process, and because the entire aircraft certification system worldwide is really one of self-regulation, the manufacturer in question seems to have taken the regulator along for a ride.
Boeing is now facing a criminal investigation by U.S. justice authorities and an audit of the certification process from the Department of Transportation. Investigators have reportedly requested information from Boeing about safety procedures, including what's in those manuals. Frédéric Zalac, CBC News, Vancouver.